I watched my parents sign the deed over to the bank while standing in their driveway holding the foreclosure notice I'd personally delivered, the house they'd lived in for 25 years, gone. All because they thought stealing from me would have no consequences. They were wrong. The look on my father's face when he realized I was the one behind their financial ruin made every sleepless night worth it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Alex Carter, and 3 months ago I discovered that my parents had systematically drained my savings account to fund my sister Emma's dream wedding. $150,000. Gone. Money I'd saved for 10 years working double shifts at the hospital, living in a cramped studio apartment, eating ramen noodles for dinner because every dollar mattered, every single penny I'd earned as a registered nurse, squirreled away for my future, handed over to my sister like I didn't exist. The discovery happened on a Tuesday morning in March. I was sitting in my apartment in downtown Portland, coffee growing cold in my hands, staring at my laptop screen in disbelief. My monthly bank statement had arrived by email and something looked wrong. Very wrong. My savings account, which should have shown a balance of $152,847, displayed $2,847. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. A glitch in the system. Banks made errors all the time. But as I scrolled through the transaction history, my blood turned to ice water, withdrawal after withdrawal, each one for thousands of dollars. Catering deposit, $15,000. Wedding venue, $45,000. Photography package, $8,500. Floral arrangements, $12,000. The list went on and on, spanning 6 months. Each transaction was authorized with my debit card, the one I kept locked in my apartment safe. The one only 3 people had access to, myself and my parents, who I'd trusted with my banking information for emergency purposes after my grandmother's stroke last year. I called the bank immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. The customer service representative, a woman named Jennifer with a kind voice, confirmed what I already knew but couldn't accept. All transactions were legitimate, authorized with my PIN number and proper identification. The person making these withdrawals had presented valid ID, knew my social security number, my mother's maiden name, every security question. It wasn't fraud in the legal sense, it was family. The room started spinning. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen chair, staring at the stack of medical bills on my counter. I'd been saving for PA school, planning to become a physician assistant, to build a life where I could finally stop living paycheck to paycheck. Those dreams were supposed to start this fall. I'd already been accepted to Oregon Health Sciences University. Tuition was due in 2 months. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Can't wait for you to see Emma's wedding photos. Everything turned out perfect. She looked like a princess." Attached was a photo of my sister in an elaborate white gown that probably cost more than my car, standing in what looked like a palace ballroom. The irony wasn't lost on me. My money had paid for her to be a princess while I couldn't afford to pursue my own education. I drove to my parents' house in Beaverton that afternoon, my mind reeling with questions I didn't want to ask. The 40-minute drive felt like hours. I kept practicing what I'd say, how I'd bring it up, but every scenario ended with me sounding crazy. How do you accuse your own parents of stealing from you? How do you ask why they thought your future was worth less than your sister's wedding day? Their house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, a modest 2-story colonial they'd bought when I was in high school. The lawn was perfectly manicured, flower beds bursting with spring tulips. My mother's car, a newer Honda CR-V, sat in the driveway next to my father's truck. Everything looked normal, peaceful, like a family that hadn't just destroyed their son's future was living there. I knocked on the front door, my bank statement folded in my back pocket like evidence I hoped I'd never have to present. My mother answered, her face lighting up with genuine joy. She was wearing her gardening clothes, dirt under her fingernails, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. This was the woman who used to make me hot chocolate when I had nightmares, who drove me to every soccer practice, who cried when I graduated nursing school. "Alex, what a wonderful surprise." She hugged me tight, smelling like lavender and soil. "Your father's in the garage tinkering with something. Come in, come in. I just made iced tea." The house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, the same candles my mother had burned for as long as I could remember. Family photos lined the hallway, chronicling our lives from childhood through Emma's recent wedding. I paused at the newest edition, a professional portrait of Emma and her husband David at their reception. Emma's dress was stunning, a designer creation with intricate beadwork and a 15-foot train. Behind them, the venue looked like something out of a fairy tale, crystal chandeliers and marble columns. "Isn't she beautiful?" my mother said, following my gaze. The wedding was absolutely perfect. Worth every penny. My stomach twisted. It must have been expensive. She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, you know how weddings are these days. Everything costs a fortune. But Emma only gets married once, hopefully." We wanted to give her the day she'd always dreamed of. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd done homework every night through high school, where my mother had taught me to cook, where we'd planned my graduation party. The familiarity of it made what I had to do even harder. My mother poured 2 glasses of iced tea, adding extra lemon to mine the way I liked it. "So what brings you by?" "Not that you need a reason, of course." I pulled out my bank statement, my hand surprisingly steady. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Her expression shifted slightly, the bright smile faltering. "Of course, honey, what is it?" I spread the statement on the kitchen table between us. "My savings account. Someone's been withdrawing money from it. A lot of money." She looked down at the paper, and I watched her face change. The color drained from her cheeks, and her hand moved instinctively to her throat. She knew. Of course she knew. "Alex, I can explain." Those 4 words confirmed everything. My parents had stolen from me, not borrowed, not planned to pay back, stolen. The woman who raised me, who taught me right from wrong, who grounded me for shoplifting a candy bar when I was 12, had systematically emptied my bank account. "Then explain." My voice came out calmer than I felt. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked their backyard. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. We were going to pay you back." "With what money?" She turned back to me, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Your father's retirement fund. We thought we had more time. Emma's wedding was happening so fast, and David's family, they're very well off. We couldn't let them think we couldn't provide for our daughter, so you provided for her with my money." We were desperate, Alex. The original budget was $50,000, but everything kept escalating. Emma had her heart set on this venue, and then David's mother started making comments about how small everything seemed, compared to their family weddings. We got caught up in trying to keep up. I stared at her, this woman who'd given birth to me, raised me, loved me my entire life, and I felt like I was looking at a stranger. "You could have asked me. Would you have said yes?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Would I have willingly given up my PA school dreams so Emma could have a fairy tale wedding? Would I have sacrificed my future for her one perfect day? The honest answer was no, and we both knew it. "That wasn't your decision to make." My father walked in then, wiping motor oil from his hands with an old rag. He took one look at the bank statement on the table, and the tears on my mother's face, and sank into his chair. "You told him. He found out on his own, Robert. What did you think would happen?" My father was a large man, 6'3" with hands like baseball mitts from 30 years of construction work. He'd always been the strong, silent type, the kind of man who fixed problems with tools and determination. But sitting there in his kitchen, looking at the evidence of what they'd done, he seemed smaller somehow. "We were going to pay you back." "When?" I asked. "I retire in 18 months. The pension payout would have covered it. And in the meantime, what was I supposed to do about school, about my life?" He looked genuinely confused by the question. "You're 28, Alex. You're doing fine on your own. Emma's just starting out." There it was. The truth neither of them wanted to say directly. Emma mattered more. Emma's happiness, Emma's future, Emma's dreams were worth more than mine. I was the responsible one, the one who would figure it out, who would be fine no matter what. Emma was the baby, the one who needed protecting, providing for, sacrificing for. I'd been the backup son my entire life without realizing it. When Emma wanted to take dance lessons, I gave up soccer because we couldn't afford both. When she needed a car for her 16th birthday, I kept working my part-time job and riding the bus. When she struggled in college, my parents paid for tutors while I took out loans. I'd accepted it all, because that's what big brothers do, right? They sacrifice for family. But this was different. This wasn't giving up activities or riding the bus. This was my future, my career, my life savings accumulated through 10 years of careful planning and sacrifice. "The school applications were due months ago," I said quietly. "The tuition deposit is due in 8 weeks. This isn't something I can just postpone." My mother sat back down, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Maybe this is a sign. Maybe you're not supposed to go back to school right now." I pulled my hand away. "A sign? You stealing my money is a sign from God. Don't be dramatic, Alex. We didn't steal anything. We're family. What's yours is ours. What's ours is yours. Then why didn't you use your own money? The silence that followed was deafening. My father cleared his throat. We didn't have enough, so you took mine. We borrowed yours, without asking, because we knew you'd say no. The circular logic was maddening. They'd taken my money because they knew I wouldn't give it to them voluntarily, but somehow that made it borrowing instead of stealing. They'd violated my trust, invaded my privacy, and destroyed my plans, but they were the victims here because I was being unreasonable about it. I stood up, folding the bank statement and putting it back in my pocket. I want the money back. Alex, be reasonable. Emma's already married. We can't undo the wedding. I don't care about the wedding. I care about my money. We don't have it, my father said simply. It's spent. Then get it. How? I looked around their kitchen, taking in the granite countertops they'd installed 2 years ago, the stainless steel appliances, the wine fridge in the corner. I thought about the new Honda in the driveway, the landscaping outside, the vacation photos from their cruise last summer. You'll figure it out. You have 18 months until retirement, right? Sell something, take out a loan, ask Emma and David to help, since they got the benefit. My mother gasped. We can't ask them for money, they're newlyweds, but you can steal from me. We didn't steal from you. I walked toward the front door, done with the conversation. My parents followed, both talking at once, explaining, and justifying and pleading. But I was no longer listening. Something had shifted inside me during that kitchen conversation, like a switch being flipped. For 28 years, I'd been the good son, the understanding one, the one who went along with whatever the family needed. Not anymore. Alex, please don't leave like this, my mother called from the doorway as I reached my car. I turned back to look at them, standing together on their front porch, united in their betrayal of me. I'll give you 30 days to come up with a plan to pay me back, all of it. That's not realistic. Then I guess we'll have to explore other options. I drove home with my windows down, letting the cold March air blast through the car. My phone buzzed with calls and texts from both parents, but I ignored them all. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't want to hear their explanations or justifications. I didn't want to be understanding or forgiving. I wanted justice.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That night, I sat in my apartment researching my options. Financial elder abuse was a real crime, even when the elder was the perpetrator and the victim was their adult child. Identity theft charges could apply since they'd used my personal information without permission. Civil court was an option for recovering the money, though the legal fees would be substantial. But as I read through legal websites and case studies, I realized that pursuing criminal charges against my own parents would likely destroy what was left of our relationship permanently. They were both in their late 50s, my father nearing retirement, my mother a homemaker with no independent income. A criminal conviction could ruin their lives in ways that went far beyond just paying me back. I closed my laptop and walked to the window of my studio apartment. The city lights of Portland stretched out below me, thousands of people living their lives, pursuing their dreams, building their futures. I'd thought I was one of them, but now I felt like I was watching from the outside, separated by circumstances I hadn't chosen and couldn't control. My phone rang. Emma's name flashed on the screen. Alex, Mom told me what happened. I'm so sorry you're upset. Upset, as if I'd lost a parking spot, not my life savings. Are you going to pay me back? Well, that's complicated. David and I just bought a house, and we're trying to start a family. Money's really tight right now. So that's a no. It's not that simple. The money's spent, Alex. The wedding's over. What do you want us to do? Get divorced and return the gifts? I could hear the defensiveness in her voice, the same tone she'd used when we were kids and she'd broken something of mine. It was never her fault, never her responsibility. Someone else would clean it up, fix it, make it right. I want you to help our parents pay back what they stole from me. They didn't steal anything, they invested in my future happiness, with my money. Family money. There it was again, that twisted logic. My individual savings had somehow become communal property, available for redistribution based on who needed it most. But the reverse was never true. When I needed help with college, I took out loans. When I needed a car, I saved up and bought used.
When I wanted to advance my career, I was expected to fund it myself. Emma, I need that money for school, so get student loans like everyone else. I had student loans, I paid them off with the money you spent on flowers. She sighed, the sound of someone being asked to solve a problem that wasn't really her responsibility. Look, I'm sorry you're having financial difficulties, but this isn't my fault. Mom and Dad made this decision, take it up with them. I did, they don't have the money. Then I guess you'll have to figure something else out. You're smart, Alex, you always land on your feet. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't just about the money. This was about my place in the family hierarchy, about who mattered and who didn't, about whose dreams were worth protecting and whose were expendable. I'd spent my entire adult life being the reliable one, the one who didn't need help, who could handle whatever life threw at him. In return, I'd become invisible. My needs didn't register because I'd trained everyone around me to believe I didn't have any. My dreams didn't matter because I'd never demanded that they matter. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of going to the hospital, I drove to a law office downtown. The attorney, Sarah Mitchell, specialized in family financial disputes. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. This happens more than you'd think, she said after I'd explained the situation. Adult children whose parents have access to their accounts for legitimate reasons, then abuse that access. What are my options? She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. Legally, you have several routes: criminal charges for identity theft and financial fraud, civil suit to recover the money. Both would likely be successful, given the paper trail. But they're your parents. Criminal charges would mean potential jail time, criminal records, difficulty finding employment. A civil judgment might result in wage garnishment or asset seizure. Is that really what you want? I thought about my father's weathered hands, my mother's vegetable garden, the home they'd lived in for decades. Did I want to destroy them to save myself? What would you do? She smiled grimly. I'd make them think I was going to pursue every legal option available while negotiating for full restitution plus damages. Sometimes the threat of consequences is more effective than the consequences themselves. I hired her that afternoon. The legal letter arrived at my parents' house 3 days later. Sarah had crafted it carefully, outlining the various laws they'd violated, the potential penalties they faced, and the deadline for response. She'd made it sound like I was preparing for war while leaving room for peaceful resolution. My father called me that evening. Alex, this letter, it's threatening us with prison. Are you calling to arrange repayment? Son, we need to talk about this reasonably. I tried reasonable. You told me to get student loans. Your mother's having panic attacks. She thinks we're going to lose the house. Something cold settled in my chest. Maybe you should have thought about that before you spent my money. This isn't you talking, this is hurt and anger. This is me protecting my future since you clearly won't. I hung up and turned off my phone. Let them sit with their panic attacks and legal threats for a while. Let them feel what I'd felt when I saw my empty bank account and my shattered dreams. But the next morning brought a surprise. I woke up to find my apartment building manager standing at my door with an eviction notice. According to the paperwork, my rent check had bounced. I called my bank immediately, discovering that my parents had somehow accessed my checking account as well and withdrawn the rent money. The customer service representative apologized, but confirmed that the account holder listed on the file, my mother, had authorization to make withdrawals. I'd never removed her access after my grandmother's medical emergency. I was being systematically destroyed by the people who'd raised me. That afternoon, I sat in Sarah Mitchell's office again, this time with a bounced rent check and an eviction notice. They're escalating, she said, reading through the bank records. This is either desperation or calculation. What do you mean? Either they're panicking and making bad decisions, or they're trying to force you into a position where you need them. Make you homeless, make you financially unstable, then offer to help if you drop the legal action. The idea that my parents would deliberately sabotage my housing situation was almost unthinkable. But then again, a month ago I would have said the same thing about them stealing my life savings. What do? We accelerate the timeline. No more negotiations. We file both criminal and civil complaints tomorrow. That night I packed everything I owned into my car and drove to a motel on the outskirts of town. The Red Roof Inn wasn't glamorous, but it was clean and cheap and temporary. I sat on the scratchy bedspread, surrounded by garbage bags full of my belongings, and tried to figure out how my life had collapsed so completely in just over a week. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Heard about your apartment. You can stay with us until you figure things out." The generosity of the offer would have been touching if it wasn't so obviously calculated. Stay with the sister who'd benefited from the money that destroyed my future, be grateful for the charity, let the whole thing blow over quietly, keep the family peace by accepting my role as the expendable one. I typed back a simple response, "No thanks." She called immediately, "Alex, don't be stubborn, David and I have plenty of room. In the house you bought with my money. That's not fair, we bought the house with our own savings. Savings you were able to keep because I paid for your wedding. Look, I know you're angry, but taking mom and dad to court isn't going to solve anything. It's just going to tear the family apart." "The family's already torn apart, Emma. I'm just the only one honest enough to admit it. What do you want from us? You want us to grovel, you want us to admit we were wrong. Fine, we were wrong. We should have asked first, are you happy now? I want my money back, and if we can't pay it back, then you'll face the consequences." The silence stretched between us, loaded with everything we weren't saying. Finally Emma spoke, her voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "You know what, Alex, maybe this is who you really are. Maybe all those years of being the good brother were just an act. Because the Alex I grew up with would never try to send his own parents to jail over money. The Alex you grew up with was a doormat. Consider this my resignation." I hung up and turned off my phone again. Tomorrow Sarah would file the paperwork that would set everything in motion. Tomorrow, my parents would discover that their son wasn't going to quietly accept being robbed by his own family. Tomorrow, the consequences would begin. But tonight, sitting in a cheap motel room with my life in garbage bags around me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since I was a child, I wasn't worried about what other people needed from me. I wasn't calculating how to keep everyone else happy. I wasn't sacrificing my own well-being for the sake of family harmony. I was done being the understanding one, done being the one who always gave in, done being the son who didn't matter enough to ask before they destroyed his future. The fight was just beginning, and for the first time in my life, I was fighting for myself. The criminal complaint was filed on a Thursday morning at 9:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I watched Sarah Mitchell submit the paperwork electronically from her office computer while I sat across from her desk, drinking coffee from a paper cup that had gone cold an hour ago. The civil lawsuit followed 30 minutes later. Within 2 hours my parents went from worried about a legal threat to facing actual criminal charges for identity theft, financial fraud and elder abuse in reverse. Sarah printed out copies of everything and slid them across her desk to me. The documents looked official and final, stamped with court seals and case numbers that turned my family drama into a matter of public record. People vs. Robert Carter and Karen Carter, Carter vs. Carter. My last name repeated over and over like an echo in an empty house. The district attorney's office will review the criminal complaint within 72 hours, Sarah explained, her voice professional but not unkind. Given the clear paper trail and the amount involved, I'd expect charges to be filed. The civil case will take longer to work through the system, but we have a strong foundation. I stared at the papers in my hands, feeling the weight of what I'd just set in motion. There was no taking this back now. No family meeting where we all sat around the kitchen table and worked things out over my mother's famous lasagna. I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. What happens to them now? They'll be notified of the charges within a week. Arraignment will be scheduled, probably within 30 days. If convicted on the criminal charges, they're looking at potential jail time, fines, restitution orders. The civil case could result in asset seizure if they can't pay the judgment voluntarily. Asset seizure. Their house, their cars, their retirement accounts, everything they'd worked for over 30 years of marriage could be gone because they decided my future was worth less than Emma's wedding photos. I drove back to the Red Roof Inn in a daze, the legal documents burning like fire in the passenger seat of my car. The motel room felt smaller than it had the night before, the walls closing in like a cardboard box. I sat on the edge of the bed and called my supervisor at the hospital to request extended leave. I couldn't focus on patient care when my own life was imploding. 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a man's voice I'd never heard before spoke my name like a question. Alex Carter, this is David Morrison, Emma's husband. I'd met David exactly 3 times, at their engagement party, at the rehearsal dinner, and at the wedding reception where I'd given a speech about love and family while standing in a room paid for with my stolen money. He'd always seemed nice enough, if a little entitled, old money family from Lake Oswego, the kind of people who summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen. What can I do for you, David? Look, I'm calling because this situation has gotten completely out of hand. Emma's beside herself. Her parents are talking about hiring criminal defense attorneys, and frankly, I think everyone needs to take a step back and breathe. I walked to the window of my motel room looking out at the parking lot where a family was loading suitcases into a minivan. Normal people doing normal things, unburdened by the weight of family betrayal and legal warfare. I tried stepping back, David. That's how I am.
You're not homeless.
You're not homeless. You're choosing to stay in a motel instead of accepting help from people who love you. The word love hit me like a physical blow. Love. They loved me so much they'd stolen my life savings. They loved me so much they'd sabotaged my housing. They loved me so much they'd never once asked what I wanted or needed before making decisions that destroyed my future.
People who love me don't steal from me. It wasn't stealing, Alex. It was a family decision. A family decision that excluded the family member whose money was being spent. David sighed, the sound of a man trying to negotiate a deal with someone who wouldn't be reasonable. Look, Emma and I have been talking. We want to help resolve this situation. What if we could come up with a payment plan? Something manageable that gets everyone what they need. I almost laughed. Almost. What did you have in mind? Well, obviously we can't come up with the full amount immediately. But what if we could pay you back over time? Say $5,000 a month for the next few years. I did the math in my head. At $5,000 a month it would take 30 months to repay the full amount, 2.5 years. By then the PA program would have started and finished without me. By then I'd have missed every opportunity this money was supposed to create. And what do I do for the next 2.5 years? Put my life on hold while you pay me back with money you wouldn't have if I hadn't funded your wedding. You figure it out. You get student loans. You work extra shifts, you make it happen. That's what adults do, Alex. There it was again. The expectation that I would be the one to sacrifice, to adapt, to make things work. David, who'd never worked a day in his life thanks to his trust fund, was lecturing me about what adults do while offering to pay me back my own money over 30 months. Counteroffer, David. You and Emma liquidate your assets, sell the house you bought with your savings that you were able to keep because I paid for your wedding, and pay me back immediately. That's not realistic. Then I guess we'll let the courts decide what's realistic. I hung up before he could respond. An hour later, Emma called, crying. Alex, please. David's trying to help. Why are you being so stubborn? I'm not being stubborn, Emma. I'm protecting myself from people who've proven they can't be trusted. We're your family. Family doesn't steal from each other. It wasn't stealing. God, why do you keep saying that? I sat down heavily on the motel bed, suddenly exhausted by the circular conversations. Emma, let me ask you something. If someone took money from your bank account without asking, used it for their own purposes, and then told you to just deal with it, what would you call that? That's different. How is it different? Because we're family and family helps each other. When have you ever helped me? The question hung in the air like smoke. I hadn't meant to ask it, but now that it was out there, I realized I genuinely wanted an answer. When, in my 28 years of life, had Emma ever sacrificed anything for my benefit? I help you all the time. How? I'm always there for you when you need to talk. When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about you? Another silence. Longer this time. That's not fair, Alex. You never tell me when you're struggling. You always act like you have everything under control. Because every time I've ever needed anything, I've been told to figure it out myself while the family resources went to you. That's not true. When I needed a car for my job, I saved up and bought a used Honda with 200,000 miles on it. When you needed a car for college, Dad co-signed a loan for a brand new Volkswagen. That was different. I was younger. When I wanted to study abroad junior year, I was told we couldn't afford it. When you wanted to spend a semester in Italy,
Mom and Dad took out a second mortgage. Alex, I didn't know about any of that. Because you never asked. Because it never occurred to you that other people in this family might have dreams too. Emma was crying harder now. The kind of deep sobs that used to make me rush to comfort her when we were kids. But I felt nothing. No urge to take back my words. No desire to make her feel better. She was 25 years old, married, living in a house that cost more than I'd make in 5 years. And she was crying because her brother wouldn't quietly accept being robbed. What do you want from me, Alex? What do you want me to do? I want you to sell your house and pay me back. We can't do that. We just bought it. We'd lose money. Shh. I don't care. You don't mean that. I absolutely mean that. You profited from theft. Now you can face the consequences. It wasn't theft. I hung up on her too. That night, I sat in my motel room researching my parents' financial situation. Public records showed their house was worth approximately $485,000 with a mortgage balance of $127,000. They had equity of over $350,000, more than enough to pay me back if they were willing to sell. My father's pension was worth another $200,000, and their combined retirement accounts totaled around $85,000. They weren't broke. They were just unwilling to sacrifice their comfort for my future the way they'd sacrificed my future for Emma's comfort. I called Sarah Mitchell the next morning. I want to expedite everything. File motions, request hearings, push for the fastest resolution possible. That's going to cost more in legal fees. I don't care. I want them to feel pressure. Alex, are you sure about this? Once we start moving aggressively, it becomes very difficult to pull back. Relationships get damaged in ways that can't be repaired. I thought about Emma's tears, about David's condescending offer, about my parents' refusal to even apologize for what they'd done. The relationships are already damaged, Sarah. I'm just making it official. She filed the motions that afternoon. By the end of the week, my parents had received notice that I was requesting an expedited hearing, immediate asset disclosure, and preliminary injunctions to prevent them from hiding or disposing of property. The legal pressure was designed to make them understand that I wasn't going away, wasn't going to accept a token payment plan, and wasn't going to be talked out of pursuing full restitution. My mother called me that Saturday, her voice shaking. Alex, honey, we need to talk. This legal stuff is getting scary. Are you ready to pay me back? We're trying to figure out how. We've been to see a financial advisor, and we're exploring options. What kind of options? Well, we could refinance the house, take out some of the equity, maybe set up a payment schedule that works for everyone. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She sounded so small and frightened, like a child who'd gotten caught doing something wrong and couldn't understand why the punishment was so severe. But then I remembered my empty bank account, my abandoned dreams, my motel room existence. How much equity do you have in the house? I'm not sure exactly. Your father handles the finances. It's $358,000, Mom. I looked it up. A pause. You've been researching our personal financial information. You mean the way you researched my bank account before you emptied it? That's different, Alex. You're our son. And you're thieves. She started crying then. The same tears that had always made me apologize, always made me back down, always made me the one to fix things and make them right. But I'd learned something important over the past week. Her tears weren't my responsibility anymore. Shh! We raised you better than this. You raised me to be a doormat. I'm choosing to be something else. I hung up and immediately called Sarah to authorize her to file for emergency asset preservation orders. If my parents thought they could refinance the house and hide the money somewhere, I couldn't reach it. They were about to learn otherwise. The orders were granted Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, my parents couldn't sell, refinance or transfer any significant assets without court approval. They were effectively frozen in place, forced to watch their legal bills mount while their options disappeared. That's when my father called. Alex, we need to meet, face to face. We can meet in court, please. One conversation, just you and me. Something in his voice made me agree. We met at a diner in Gresham, halfway between his house and my motel. He was already sitting in a booth when I arrived, looking older than I remembered. His hands, those massive construction worker hands that had built our backyard deck and taught me to change oil, were shaking slightly as he stirred sugar into his coffee. You look tired, he said, when I sat down across from him. I am tired. This whole situation, it's gotten out of hand. I ordered coffee from the waitress, and waited for him to continue. He looked like a man trying to find words for something he'd never had to say before. I need you to understand something, son. We never meant to hurt you, but you did hurt me. I know, and I'm sorry for that, but we believed we were doing the right thing for the family. Whose family? Because it seems like you were doing the right thing for Emma's family. I'm not sure I was even considered. He winced like I'd hit him. You've always been so independent, so capable. Emma, she's always needed more help. Did it ever occur to you that maybe I needed help too? That maybe I just didn't ask, because I'd learned not to expect it? You never said anything. I shouldn't have had to say anything. You shouldn't have had to ask permission before stealing from me. We sat in silence for a while, two men who'd spent my entire life loving each other, but apparently never really understanding each other. My father looked out the window at the parking lot, watching cars come and go. The lawyer says we could lose the house. You could. Your mother, she's not sleeping. She's taking anxiety medication now. She thinks we're going to prison.
What?
He turned back to me, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. Is that what you want? You want to see your parents in jail? The question was designed to make me feel guilty, to make me the bad guy for pursuing justice. But I'd moved beyond guilt. I want my money back, Dad. That's all I've ever wanted. We don't have it. Then get it. How? I leaned forward, looking directly into his eyes. Sell the house. Alex, we can't sell the house. It's our home. We've lived there for 15 years. I can't go to school. My career is over. My savings are gone. But you can't sell your house. It's not the same thing. Why not? Because we're 58 years old. We can't start over. I'm 28 years old. Why should I have to start over? He had no answer for that. No logic that could justify why their stability mattered more than mine. Why their comfort was worth more than my future. He just sat there, staring into his coffee cup like the answers might be floating in the cream. What if we could pay you back over time? Emma and David offered a payment plan. $5,000 a month for 30 months. That's something. It's not enough. By the time you finish paying me back, the opportunity will be gone.
The program will be over. I'll be 31 years old, starting from scratch. You could take out loans. With what collateral? I have no assets, no credit history for large loans, no family to co-sign because my family stole from me. My father's face crumpled like I'd broken something inside him. For a moment I felt a flicker of the old sympathy, the old desire to make him feel better. But then I remembered my motel room, my abandoned dreams, my empty future. I'm not trying to be cruel, Dad. I'm trying to survive what you did to me. We were trying to help Emma, by destroying me. We thought you'd understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that when the family needed to make a sacrifice, it was my sacrifice to make. I understand that when someone needed to lose their dreams, it was my dreams that didn't matter. I understand that I've spent my entire life being the expendable son. That's not true. Prove it. Sell the house and pay me back. He left the diner without saying goodbye. I sat there for another hour, drinking coffee and watching traffic, feeling hollowed out but strangely peaceful. The conversation had crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about whether I was going to spend the rest of my life accepting scraps from people who saw me as disposable, or whether I was going to demand the respect I'd never learned to ask for. That evening Sarah called with an update. The criminal charges are moving forward. The DA's office wants to prosecute. This is a clean case with clear evidence, and they think it sends a good message about financial crime. When's the arraignment? 2 weeks. But Alex, I have to ask you again. Are you prepared for what this means? Your parents could go to prison. Their lives will be destroyed. Their lives will be disrupted. My life was destroyed. I just want to make sure you've thought through all the consequences. I had thought about them. I'd thought about my father in a jail cell, my mother crying in court, Emma blaming me for tearing the family apart. I'd thought about holidays I'd spend alone, grandchildren I might never meet, a family legacy poisoned by lawsuits and betrayal. But I'd also thought about my empty bank account, my abandoned dreams, my motel room existence. I'd thought about 10 years of careful saving erased and 6 months of selfish spending. I'd thought about being expected to understand, to forgive, to move on,
To be the good son who quietly accepted whatever his family decided he deserved. I've thought about everything, Sarah. File whatever motions you need to file. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal preparations and family phone calls I didn't answer. Emma left voicemails alternating between tears and threats. David sent text messages with increasingly desperate payment offers. My mother called every day, sometimes sobbing, sometimes angry, always asking me to please just talk to them, please just work this out, please just be the understanding son they'd raised me to be. But I was done being understanding. I was done being the son who absorbed everyone else's problems and never created any of his own. For the first time in my adult life, I was the one causing waves, demanding attention, refusing to be ignored. The arraignment was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in downtown Portland. I didn't plan to attend, but Sarah recommended it. The judge needs to see that there's a real victim here, not just a family squabble. Your presence makes this case more serious. So I put on my best suit, the one I'd worn to Emma's wedding, and drove downtown to watch my parents be formally charged with crimes. The courthouse was busier than I'd expected, filled with lawyers and defendants, and families dealing with their own legal crises. I found a seat in the back of the courtroom and waited. When my parents' case was called, they walked to the defendant's table with their attorney, an expensive-looking woman in a tailored suit, who probably cost more per hour than I made in a day. My parents looked smaller in the formal courtroom setting, older and more fragile than I remembered. My mother wore her best dress, the navy blue one she'd worn to my nursing school graduation. My father had on his funeral suit, the one he wore to church and weddings and other occasions that required dignity. The charges were read aloud: identity theft in the first degree, financial fraud, elder abuse in reverse. Each charge carried potential jail time, fines, restitution requirements. The words echoed in the courtroom, like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this moment. My parents pled not guilty, as their attorney had advised. The judge set bail, which they posted immediately, and scheduled a pre-trial conference for 6 weeks later. The whole process took less than 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes changed everything. My parents were now officially criminals, their names entered into court records, their fingerprints on file with the state. As they left the courtroom, my mother saw me sitting in the back. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment I saw something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, but genuine fear. She was afraid of me, afraid of what I'd become, afraid of the son who'd chosen justice over family loyalty. I didn't wave, I didn't nod. I just looked at her until she turned away and walked out of the courtroom with my father and their expensive attorney. They were facing the possibility of prison time, and I was the reason why. That night, alone in my motel room, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of what I'd done. I'd criminally prosecuted my own parents, put them in a position where they might lose their home, their freedom, their reputation. I'd chosen my own future over their comfort, my own justice over family peace, and I felt nothing but relief. For 28 years I'd been trained to put everyone else's needs before my own. I'd been taught that being a good son meant being understanding, forgiving, accommodating. I'd learned to measure my worth by how little trouble I caused, how few demands I made, how willing I was to sacrifice for the greater good of family harmony. But family harmony built on one person's sacrifice isn't harmony at all. It's exploitation dressed up as love. And I was done being exploited by people who claimed to love me while systematically devaluing everything I'd worked for. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Robert Carter. We need to talk. Can we meet tomorrow?" My father texting me from what was probably a burner phone since I'd been ignoring calls from their regular numbers. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back a single word: no. But he didn't give up. 10 minutes later, another text: "Please, son, one more conversation. I think we can work something out." I turned off my phone and went to sleep. Tomorrow I would call Sarah and ask her to begin asset seizure proceedings. If my parents wanted to work something out, they could do it through the courts. I was done being their understanding son. From now on I was just their victim, demanding justice through every legal means available. The game had changed, and for the first time in my life, I was playing to win. The asset seizure motion was approved on a Wednesday morning in April. I wasn't in the courtroom when it happened, but Sarah called me with the news while I was sitting in a coffee shop near where I used to work, reading job listings on my laptop, and trying to figure out how to rebuild a career that had been derailed by my own family. The judge granted everything we asked for, she said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction that I'd learned to recognize. Sarah enjoyed winning, especially when the case was as clear-cut as mine. Your parents have 30 days to liquidate sufficient assets to satisfy the judgment, or the court will begin forced sale proceedings. I closed my laptop and walked outside into the spring air. Portland was coming alive after another long gray winter. Cherry blossoms lined the street where I stood, their pink petals drifting down like confetti, celebrating someone else's victory. But this victory was mine, hard-won through months of legal warfare against people who'd raised me to believe that family loyalty meant accepting whatever treatment they decided to give. What does that mean in practical terms? It means they have to sell the house, Alex. There's no other way for them to come up with the money. Their retirement accounts and your father's pension aren't sufficient to cover the judgment plus legal fees and penalties. The house, the home where I'd grown up, where I'd done homework at the kitchen table, where my mother had taught me to cook Sunday dinners, and my father had shown me how to change a tire in the driveway. The house that had been the backdrop for every Christmas morning, every birthday celebration, every family gathering of my entire life. In 30 days, it would belong to someone else. I should have felt guilty, should have felt like the monster my family believed I'd become. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. For the first time since discovering my empty bank account, I had a concrete timeline for getting my life back. What about the criminal case? That's proceeding separately. The DA isn't interested in plea bargains that don't include jail time. Your parents' attorney is getting desperate. That afternoon I drove past my childhood home for the first time since the legal proceedings had begun. A for sale sign stood in the front yard like a white flag of surrender, slightly crooked as if it had been planted in haste. The lawn needed mowing, and my mother's prized rose bushes looked neglected. The house itself seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than it had in my memories. I parked across the street and sat in my car, watching the windows for signs of life. A moving truck would come soon, followed by strangers who would repaint the walls and replace the carpet, and turn my childhood bedroom into something unrecognizable. The thought should have devastated me, but instead I felt a strange sense of closure, like watching the final scene of a movie I'd been trapped in for 28 years. My phone rang. Emma's name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. She'd been calling daily since the asset seizure order, leaving increasingly frantic messages about family forgiveness and Christian values, and how our grandmother would be ashamed of what I was doing. But our grandmother had been dead for 3 years, and she'd never let anyone steal from her grandchildren while she was alive. The voicemail notification appeared. I played the message while still parked outside my parents' house. Alex, it's me, again. I know you're getting these messages even if you're not calling back. I need you to know that Mom had to be hospitalized yesterday. Panic attack. The doctor says the stress is affecting her heart. She's asking for you, Alex. She wants to apologize, wants to make things right. Please, just call me back. Please, don't let our family destroy itself over money. I deleted the message and drove back to my motel. My mother's health problems were unfortunate, but they didn't change the fact that she'd participated in stealing my future. Stress-related heart issues were treatable. Destroyed dreams were not. That evening, Sarah called with another update. Your parents' attorney contacted me. They want to discuss a settlement. What kind of settlement? Full restitution plus legal fees and damages. They're prepared to sell the house and liquidate their retirement accounts to meet the judgment immediately, if you'll agree to drop the criminal charges. I walked to the window of my motel room, looking out at the interstate where traffic flowed endlessly past. Cars full of people going somewhere, doing something, living lives that hadn't been sabotaged by their own families. Soon, I could be one of them again. What's your recommendation? Professional. Take the deal. You get your money back plus damages, and you avoid the uncertainty of a criminal trial. Personally, that's not my decision to make. How much are we talking about in total? Approximately $210,000. Your original savings plus legal fees, court costs, and punitive damages for emotional distress. $210, enough to pay for PA school, plus living expenses. plus money left over to rebuild my life properly. It was more than I'd ever had, more than I'd dared to hope for when this nightmare began. I'll think about it. Alex, they need an answer by Friday. The house has multiple offers, and they want to close quickly. Multiple offers. People were eager to buy my childhood home, to raise their own families in the rooms where I'd learned to walk and talk and dream. Within a few weeks, children would be sleeping in my old bedroom, playing in the backyard where my father had taught me to throw a baseball. I spent that night walking around Portland, trying to figure out what I actually wanted. Justice, revenge, my money back, the complete destruction of my parents' lives. 6 months ago, the answer would have been simple. I'd have wanted forgiveness, reconciliation, a family meeting where everyone apologized, and we moved forward together. But 6 months ago, I'd been a different person. I'd been the son who absorbed problems instead of creating them, who prioritized everyone else's comfort over his own needs, the son who'd been raised to disappear when convenient. I found myself standing outside the PA program building at Oregon Health Sciences University, looking up at the windows where my classmates would have been studying if I'd been able to afford tuition. The building was dark except for security lights, but I could imagine the labs and lecture halls, the future I'd been working toward for 10 years before my family decided it wasn't important enough to protect. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Emma's pregnant. Congratulations, Uncle Alex. She wanted you to know, Uncle Alex, as if we were still a normal family, sharing normal news instead of people locked in legal warfare. As if Emma's pregnancy somehow erased the fact that she'd stolen my future to pay for her perfect wedding. As if becoming an uncle was supposed to make me forget that I'd never been treated like a brother worth protecting. I typed back a simple response, congratulations. Then I blocked his number. Friday morning came with gray skies, and the smell of rain in the air. I met Sarah at her office to give her my decision about the settlement offer. I want to take the deal, but with modifications. She looked up from her legal pad, pen poised. What kind of modifications? I want a written apology, not a legal disclaimer, but a real acknowledgement of what they did and how it affected me. I want it signed by both parents and notarized. That's unusual, but not impossible. What else? I want them to pay for my therapy, whatever counseling I need to deal with the family trauma this created. Not just until I feel better, but for as long as I want it. Reasonable. Anything else?
I thought about this part all night, weighing my desire for complete revenge against my need to move forward with my life. I want a no-contact clause. They don't call me, don't text me, don't show up at my apartment or my job. If they want to communicate with me in the future, it goes through attorneys. For how long? Forever. Sarah set down her pen and looked at me carefully. Alex, that's a significant decision. You're essentially cutting off your family permanently. They cut me off when they decided my future didn't matter. What about Emma? The pregnancy, grandchildren? I'd thought about that too. About birthday parties I'd miss, Christmas mornings that would happen without me, a nephew or niece who would grow up hearing stories about Uncle Alex who destroyed the family over money. The idea of missing those moments hurt, but not as much as the idea of pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. Emma made her choice when she told me to get student loans instead of asking her new husband to help pay me back. She doesn't get to play happy family now because it's convenient. Sarah drafted the settlement modifications and sent them to my parents' attorney that afternoon. The response came back within 2 hours. Accepted. Everything I'd asked for, agreed to without negotiation. My parents were so desperate to avoid prison that they'd sign whatever document I put in front of them. The closing on their house was scheduled for the following Wednesday. I wasn't invited, but I drove by anyway, watching from the street as my parents loaded their remaining belongings into a U-Haul truck. They looked older than their 58 years, moving slowly like people carrying invisible weight. My mother stopped frequently to rest, one hand pressed to her chest. My father worked methodically, his face expressionless as he carried boxes containing a lifetime of memories. Neither of them looked in my direction, though I was sure they knew I was there. We existed in the same space without acknowledging each other, like ghosts haunting different versions of the same story. The new owners arrived as my parents were finishing. A young couple with a toddler and another baby on the way, all smiles and excitement as they walked through their new front door.
The woman had the same kind of joy on her face that my mother used to have when she talked about our family home, before I'd forced them to sell it to pay me back for stealing my future. I drove away before the moving truck pulled out of the driveway. The settlement check arrived the following Friday, deposited directly into my new bank account that only I had access to. $210,000, more money than I'd ever seen in one place. The first thing I did was pay off my motel bill and rent a furnished apartment in the Pearl District, a one-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city I was about to conquer. The second thing I did was pay my tuition for the fall PA program, in full. No student loans, no payment plans, no anxiety about whether I could afford textbooks or living expenses. For the first time in my adult life, I had financial security that couldn't be taken away by people who claimed to love me. The third thing I did was go shopping for furniture. Not fancy furniture, just basic pieces that belonged to me and no one else. A bed, a couch, a dining table, dishes that matched. I'd lived my entire adult life with hand-me-downs and thrift store finds, saving every possible dollar for my future. Now I could afford to live like someone who mattered, someone whose comfort was worth investing in. The apartment felt enormous after months in a motel room. I walked from room to room, turning lights on and off, opening and closing cabinets, testing the shower pressure, and adjusting the thermostat. Everything worked perfectly because I could afford a place where things worked, where the heat came on when I wanted it, and the neighbors weren't screaming through thin walls. I unpacked my few belongings and arranged them carefully in the space. My nursing school diploma went on the living room wall next to the acceptance letter from the PA program that I'd kept folded in my wallet through the darkest months. These were the achievements that belonged to me, that no one could steal or diminish or use for their own purposes. That evening, I sat on my new couch in my new apartment, eating takeout Chinese food and watching the sunset paint Portland's skyline in shades of orange and gold. My phone sat silent on the coffee table, no missed calls or urgent text from family members who needed something from me. The silence felt like luxury. A knock at my door interrupted my peaceful evening. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a delivery driver holding a large floral arrangement. I almost didn't accept it, assuming it was from my family attempting to break the no-contact agreement we just signed. But the card was from my former colleagues at the hospital, congratulating me on my acceptance to PA school and wishing me well in my new life. People who weren't related to me had taken time to celebrate my success, co-workers who'd noticed my absence and cared enough to track down my new address. Friends who'd never stolen from me, never lied to me, never expected me to sacrifice my dreams for their comfort. I placed the flowers on my dining table and read the individual notes from nurses and doctors I'd worked alongside for years. So proud of you, Alex. You deserve this. Can't wait to see what you accomplish. Words of encouragement from people who'd seen my work ethic, who knew what I'd sacrificed to pursue advanced education, who understood that my dreams mattered. The contrast was stark. My family, who'd known me my entire life, had seen my savings as something they could take without asking. My colleagues, who'd known me for just a few years, had seen my potential as something worth celebrating and protecting. 3 weeks later, I received a thick envelope with no return address. Inside was the notarized apology I'd demanded as part of the settlement, signed by both parents in careful handwriting that looked like they'd practiced the words multiple times. To our son Alex Carter, it began. We acknowledge that we violated your trust by accessing your personal bank account without permission and using your savings for purposes you did not approve. We understand that our actions caused you significant financial hardship and emotional distress. We take full responsibility for our decisions and recognize that we damaged our relationship with you in ways that may be irreparable. We are sorry for the pain we have caused and respect your decision to limit contact with us as you rebuild your life. We love you and hope that someday you might find it possible to forgive us, though we understand that forgiveness must be earned and cannot be demanded. It was signed, Robert and Karen Carter, not Mom and Dad. Even in their apology, they'd understood that they'd lost the right to parental endearments through their actions. I read the letter twice, then filed it away in a folder with the rest of the legal documents. The apology was nice, but it didn't change anything. They were sorry they'd been caught, sorry they'd faced consequences, sorry their comfortable life had been disrupted. But they'd never acknowledged that I was worth more than Emma's wedding photos or that my dreams mattered as much as her happiness. PA school started in August, with an orientation week that felt like the beginning of a new life. I sat in a lecture hall surrounded by other students who'd worked years to get there, who'd sacrificed and saved and planned for this opportunity. Many of them had student loans that would take decades to repay. Some were changing careers in their 30s and 40s, starting over after realizing their first choice hadn't been right. I was one of the few who could afford to focus entirely on my studies without worrying about money. Not because my family had supported my dreams, but because I'd fought for them. Because I'd refused to accept that other people's priorities were more important than my own future. The first semester was intense in ways I'd expected and some I hadn't. The academic work was challenging but manageable for someone who'd been a nurse for 6 years. The emotional work of learning to trust my own judgment again was harder. I'd spent so many years deferring to family opinion, accommodating other people's needs, accepting whatever treatment they decided to give me. In clinical rotations, I had to learn to advocate for patients the way I'd never learned to advocate for myself. I had to make decisions based on evidence and professional judgment rather than on what would keep everyone happy. I had to set boundaries with difficult patients and demanding families, skills I'd never developed in my personal life, because I'd been trained to be endlessly accommodating. My advisor, Dr. Patricia Reeves, noticed my tendency to apologize for taking up space, for asking questions, for having opinions. During our monthly check-ins, she'd call me on it. "You have excellent clinical instincts, Alex, but you second-guess yourself constantly. You know the right answer, but you're afraid to commit to it. I've been wrong before. Everyone's been wrong before. The difference is that some people learn from their mistakes and move forward with confidence. Others get paralyzed by the possibility of being wrong again." She was right, though I didn't tell her why. I'd been trained since childhood to believe that my judgment was less valuable than other people's, that my needs were negotiable while everyone else's were fixed, that causing waves was worse than drowning silently. But medical practice didn't allow for that kind of thinking. Patients needed advocates who would fight for their care, challenge incorrect orders, demand better treatment when necessary. They needed providers who trusted their own expertise enough to stand firm when they knew they were right. Learning to advocate professionally helped me practice advocating personally. When my apartment management company tried to raise my rent illegally, I fought it instead of accepting the increase. When a classmate tried to pressure me into doing his share of a group project, I refused instead of taking on extra work to keep the peace. When a professor made an error in grading that cost me points, I challenged it instead of accepting the lower score. Small victories that taught me I didn't have to absorb other people's problems or accept whatever treatment they decided to give me. 6 months into the program, I received a graduation announcement in the mail. Emma had finished her master's degree in marketing, an achievement funded by her husband's family money, and the stability that came from not having to work while pregnant. The announcement included photos of her in cap and gown, beaming with the kind of joy that came from accomplishing goals without sacrifice. I threw the announcement in the trash without reading the details. Emma's achievements were no longer my business, just as my success was no longer hers to celebrate or demand. We were strangers now who happened to share DNA and childhood memories. A few weeks later, my apartment mailbox contained a baby shower invitation. Emma was having a boy, the invitation announced, and the family was gathering to celebrate. "Uncle Alex," it said at the bottom in handwritten script, "we hope you can join us for this special day." The invitation went in the trash too. I wasn't Uncle Alex anymore. I was just Alex Carter, Pennsylvania student, future healthcare provider, person who'd learned to protect his own interests after spending decades protecting everyone else's. The baby was born in March of my second year, during spring break when I should have been studying for boards. I learned about it through a mutual friend who'd seen the birth announcement on social media. 8 pounds, 6 ounces, healthy boy named after my grandfather. The friend showed me photos on her phone, Emma exhausted but glowing, David proud and nervous, my parents holding their first grandchild with the kind of joy they'd never shown for my accomplishments. I felt nothing looking at those pictures. No regret, no longing, no urge to reconcile for the sake of family unity. Just mild curiosity about people I used to know who were living lives that no longer intersected with mine. "He's beautiful," my friend said, waiting for some kind of reaction. "I'm sure he is. Don't you want to meet him? Your nephew." I thought about explaining that blood relationships didn't automatically create obligations, that people who'd stolen my future didn't get to claim my presence for their celebrations. Instead I just said, "No." She looked at me like I'd admitted to kicking puppies, but I'd grown comfortable with other people's disapproval. Family loyalty was supposed to flow both ways, but mine had always been a one-way street that led to everyone else's happiness at the expense of my own. I graduated from PA school in May, with honors and a job offer from Portland General Hospital's emergency department. The ceremony was held in a large auditorium filled with families celebrating their children's achievements. I sat alone in the crowd, watching classmates hug parents and siblings and spouses who'd supported them through 2 years of intense study. I wasn't alone because no one loved me. I was alone because I'd chosen to cut ties with people who'd claimed to love me while systematically devaluing everything I worked for. The solitude felt like victory rather than loss. Dr. Reeves found me after the ceremony, still wearing my cap and gown, standing outside the auditorium in the spring sunshine. "Congratulations, Alex. You should be proud of what you've accomplished."
Thank you for everything.
"Where's your family? I thought they'd want to be here for this." I'd never told her the full story of why I'd been able to afford school without loans, why I lived alone in a nice apartment, why I never talked about family visits or holiday plans. They had other priorities. She studied my face for a moment, recognizing something in my expression that suggested the answer was more complicated than it appeared. "Well, their loss is the medical profession's gain. You're going to be an excellent PA." That evening, I celebrated by taking myself to dinner at a restaurant I'd been wanting to try for months. Not a fancy place, just a neighborhood bistro with good food and reasonable prices. I ordered a bottle of wine, and ate slowly, savoring the meal and the accomplishment it represented. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw a photo of my nephew sitting in a high chair, cake smeared across his face, grinning at the camera. "First birthday party," the message said. "Wish you were here." I looked at the photo for a long moment, taking in the child's bright eyes and easy smile. He looked happy and loved, surrounded by family who would undoubtedly sacrifice for his dreams the way they'd never sacrificed for mine. He'd grow up knowing he mattered, that his future was worth protecting, that his needs came first. I deleted the photo and blocked the number. This child would have a good life with people who prioritized his happiness. But those people had proven they couldn't be trusted with mine, and I wasn't willing to risk being disappointed by them again. My life as Alex Carter, emergency medicine PA, began the following Monday. The work was challenging and rewarding, exactly what I'd hoped for when I'd started saving money 10 years earlier. I worked with teams of doctors and nurses who respected my judgment, consulted my opinion, spouse said, my opinion, valued my contributions to patient care. I rented a house in southeast Portland with a yard and a garage and neighbors who waved when they saw me working in the garden. I adopted a dog from the shelter, a border collie mix named Murphy, who'd been abandoned by his previous owners but learned to trust again with patience and consistency. Friends invited me to dinner parties and hiking trips and weekend getaways. I dated occasionally, cautiously, learning to trust people slowly instead of immediately or not at all. I built a life that belonged entirely to me, funded by money I'd fought to recover from people who'd stolen it. 3 years after graduation, I received news that my father had suffered a heart attack. The message came through my attorney, as required by the no-contact agreement I'd insisted on. He was stable but would need ongoing cardiac care, the kind that was expensive even with Medicare. I felt mild concern for his health, but no obligation to provide financial or emotional support. He'd made his choices about what our relationship was worth when he'd emptied my bank account. The consequences of those choices were his to live with. 6 months later, another message arrived through my attorney. My parents were struggling financially, living in a rental apartment, unable to afford the kind of retirement. My mother's anxiety had developed into full panic disorder that required expensive medications. They were asking if I might consider helping them, not financially, but just by talking to them occasionally. I sent back a one-word response through my attorney: no. My life had moved beyond revenge into something healthier, indifference. My parents existed somewhere in Portland, dealing with the consequences of their choices, but their struggles no longer registered as my problems to solve. I'd broken the pattern of responsibility that had defined our relationship since childhood. On my 5th anniversary as a PA, I received a promotion to department supervisor, and a salary increase that put me in the top 10% of earners in my field. The money I'd fought so hard to recover had multiplied into genuine financial security through careful investing and living below my means. I owned my house outright, had a 6-month emergency fund, and was already saving for early retirement. The future that had been stolen and then reclaimed was better than anything I'd originally planned, because I'd learned to protect it fiercely. That evening, I sat on my back porch with Murphy at my feet, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. My phone sat silent on the table beside me, no missed calls from family members who needed something, no text messages asking for favors or money or understanding. The silence that had once felt like abandonment now felt like peace. I'd learned the difference between being loved and being used, between family loyalty and family. The people who'd raised me had confused the two, and I'd spent years confused along with. But confusion was a choice, and I'd chosen clarity instead. I'd chosen a life where my dreams mattered, where my future was worth protecting, where my success was celebrated rather than diminished or stolen. The house they'd lost to pay me back had been replaced by renters who appreciated them. The retirement they'd planned had been replaced by part-time jobs and social security. The comfortable life they'd built had been replaced by the consequences of valuing one child's happiness over another's future. I felt no guilt about their reduced circumstances, because I'd learned an important truth: you can only be a victim if you choose to remain one. My parents had chosen to be predators when they'd stolen my savings. I'd chosen to be a survivor when I'd fought to get it back. The game had ended years ago, but I'd won in every way that mattered. I had my money, my career, my independence, and my self-respect. They had each other, and their regrets and the knowledge that their comfort had cost them their son. Justice, it turned out, wasn't about revenge. It was about refusing to accept unacceptable treatment and enforcing consequences for people who thought family relationships meant they could hurt you without repercussions. I'd learned to demand better because I'd finally understood that I deserved better. The lesson had cost my parents their house, but it had given me my life back. Fair trade. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.